It is a quiet Sunday morning on the Hawaiian island of Oahu at the American Naval Base, Pearl Harbor. American planes are on the ground, their engines silent. It is an early Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor, but out of the quiet sky, 360 carrier-based Japanese planes will soon make this a day that changed America. This is the first of 21 days that changed America. We've begun in 1941 with the attack on Pearl Harbor. For 25 years, we will look at events like this one. With newsreels as our window into the historic past, here are the rest of those momentous days that shaped our history.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
6 months later, June 5th, 1942, a day that changes the balance of power in the Pacific.
Filmed under fire, these are the first pictures of America's great naval victory in the Pacific. Army, Navy, and Marine planes, cooperating with the fleet, surprise a Jap invasion force sent to capture strategic Midway Island, stepping stone to Hawaii and the North American continent. U.S. planes roaring to the attack amid a rain of anti-aircraft fire. The toll, 18 Japanese ships, cruisers, carriers, and destroyers, crippled like this or sent to the bottom. A blow more than equal to the defeat Japan suffered in the Battle of the Coral Sea. Back in port, Admiral Nimitz, who directed the action, bestows medals for deeds of valor. They fought the strangest naval battle in history, a battle in which the ships were hundreds of miles apart. The stories told by these hero pilots may rewrite all textbooks on naval warfare. They proved again and again that warplanes can blast battleships and transports. In one epic engagement, these men upset the balance of power in the Pacific.
June 6th, 1944, D-Day. Here are filmed records of the day the Allied forces began their final assault on Nazi terror.
The most powerful invasion air force ever launched. Some of the 11,000 planes that opened the path through the so-called impregnable Atlantic Wall. Between Le Havre and Cherbourg in Normandy, the Allied lightning strikes. Backing up the mightiest invasion by air, 4,000 ships, combat and landing craft carry the war to the enemy by sea. The Coast Guard, the Navy, the Air Forces land hundreds of thousands of British, Canadians, and Yanks on Hitler's doorstep within a few days. Isolating Cherbourg with its strategic harbor is the immediate objective. Landings are made under a naval barrage. President Roosevelt said, "Let our hearts be stout. And later, Germany is the first on the list for destruction. These troops, bucking the choppy seas in the Channel, heeded his words. While landings were successful, we were not without our losses. Each hour, and the enemy's hedgehog defenses are ahead. This is the supreme moment of invasion. This is frontal assault on an entrenched enemy. Heroic medical corpsmen remove wounded for return to England. The first batch of Nazi prisoners, the Supermen who believed their West Wall impregnable, and a Frenchman to whom the stars and stripes spell liberty. He's waited a long time for this. What he says wouldn't pass the censor. During the landings, the merciless pounding of the entire invasion area continues. Here is real pinpoint bombing. One of the last bridges between the invasion coast and Paris gets it. When the beachhead is established, heavier equipment is moved in. Reinforcements for those heroes who are bringing liberation to the people of Europe. The cost of our initial landing was but a fraction of what our leaders expected. More than 10,000 German prisoners were captured in the first few days of the battle. And we know one Hun who's not going to peddle any more Nazi philosophy. The Allied advance is rapid as we mop up town after town. Some Yank will have a nice doormat when he gets back home. The Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower, holds an early conference with General Montgomery, the commander of English ground troops, and they see that all operations go according to plan. These are the men who will lead us to victory, along with General Omar Bradley with glasses, who commands our infantry. The cost of our first landing was low, but many wounded are returned to English ports, men injured in that first assault. Let these pictures remind us that there's still a long road ahead to Berlin. The bond you buy in this 5th War Loan Drive can help men like these on the path to victory. Now it's your turn. Buy that extra bond today.
March 16th, 1945. The Marines take Iwo Jima.
Foot by foot is the bitter and bloody story of the advance on Iwo Jima, whose 8 square miles cost 4,100 American lives and total casualties of 20,000, half as many as all previous Marine operations in the Pacific combined. Navy and Marine Corps pictures show alligators grinding their way forward for the first assault on Mount Suribachi, whose guns command most of the island. Its capture is vital, and Navy planes roar into the attack. Marines dig in for the big push up the mountain behind a curtain of dive bombing. Big guns of the fleet offshore join the pulverizing barrage. On shore, howitzers hammer the Japs holed up in Suribachi's countless caves. The summit of Suribachi is now in range of concentrated land fire. The slow, agonizing crawl begins under merciless Jap fire, and pockets must be cleaned out with grenades. 22,000 Japs died in the fanatical defense of Iyo.
The capture by U.S. Marines of this tiny Pacific island will provide airstrips for American fighter planes to help them protect bombers on their way to Japan and provide a memorable symbol of American patriotism and bravery.
The fortifications of the Jap bastion make even more incredible the epic of Marine achievement. But take it they did, to their everlasting glory. The blood-soaked volcanic ash will live forever as their monument.
World War II ends August 14th, 1945.
The day of days for America and her allies. Crowds before the White House await the announcement from the president that the Japs have surrendered unconditionally.
I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government in reply to the message forwarded to that government by the Secretary of State on August 11th. I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan. In the reply, there is no qualification.
Reporters rush out to relay the news to an anxious world and touch off celebrations throughout the country. Washington is jubilant. And in Chicago, more than 1 million sing and dance in the streets in the biggest celebration the Windy City has ever seen. Joy is unconfined.
The newsreel narrator is as ecstatic as the people shown in the film. But there's no doubt happy days change our history too.
It was 4 o'clock Pacific time in San Francisco when the announcement came, and people were quick to leave their offices for an impromptu, spontaneous celebration. But it was in that city's Chinatown where Victory Day was the most joyous. Firecrackers that had been hoarded for years are set off in a triumphant roar. Seattle let loose all the pent-up emotions of 3 years and 8 months of war, and to the victors, the spoils. The pose may not be dignified, but the young lady is not the least upset. Peace, it's wonderful. The Navy photographer gives us a preview of Admiral Halsey's ambition to ride the Emperor's white horse through the streets of Tokyo. Their rallying cry is, "Go to it, Admiral," and so say we all of us. But the greatest, wildest celebration of all was in New York's Times Square, where 2 million people, by far the greatest in the city's history, filled the streets all day waiting for the official word. A hilarious, happy throng, they cheered every rumor that it was all over. And when President Truman's announcement came at 7 o'clock, the lid really blew off. Tens of thousands of proud American flags dotted the square, and as the day wore on, hilarity reached a high peak. Far into the night, the happy crowd screamed their relief at the end of the greatest war in history. From early Tuesday morning, the celebration went on for 24 hours. New York never celebrated like this before, but never did they have a better reason.
This is the history-changing day when the first atom bomb is dropped on Japan. But the story begins in New Mexico.
With that mighty blast on the New Mexico desert, a new era in civilization has begun, and the doom of Japan is sealed. For this is the first test of the atomic bomb, which was later to wipe out the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and drive the Japs to surrender. These official U.S. Army pictures were taken from 6 miles away, and appalled scientists saw a column of smoke soar 40,000 feet into the stratosphere. The atomic age, for better or worse, is here.
November 4th, 1948.
The political miracle of the century begins to take form as millions of Americans go to the polls to elect a president. With Thomas E. Dewey, Republican nominee, a heavy favorite on all counts, the nation is expecting a smashing GOP victory. In the smallest hamlets, And in the teeming reaches of New York City, the electorate exercises its franchise to choose a leader in the democratic manner. Mr. and Mrs. Dewey arrive to cast their ballots in Manhattan. The governor is full of confidence, facing a horde of photographers clustered on every available perch to record this historic event. The popular governor of New York and former gang nemesis makes his choice and then gets ready to listen to the return. President Truman is no less confident as he arrives to vote in Independence, Missouri. After a record campaign across the nation, he comes home to ballot, accompanied by his staunchest supporters, his daughter Margaret and Mrs. Truman. His human appeal and sincere desire for world peace starts an avalanche of Democratic votes that sweep him to victory, along with the sympathetic majority in both houses of Congress.
On this day, Americans rejected the political left and right, the arch-conservatives and radicals, and instead voted to keep America moving along the path that Roosevelt had charted and Truman was continuing.
Continue to confirm the Truman victory, the president carrying 28 states with 304 electoral votes to Dewey's 16 states and 189, not counting the sleeper votes. Finally, the suspense is over. Truman wins with a popular vote of 21,462,000 to his Republican opponent's 19,862,000, with Jim Farley and Howard McGrath celebrating. Governor Dewey sends a traditional telegram of congratulations to an opponent who fought an uphill battle waged among the grassroots. And this is his victory pledge. All my efforts will be devoted to the cause of peace in the world and the prosperity of our people here at home.
Communist North Korea on June 30th, 1950, invades the South.
America musters her forces as the Korean crisis daily becomes more grave. Enlistment machinery begins to click as the United States is made the spearhead of the United Nations police force against Northern Korean invaders. Particular emphasis is placed on the Marine Corps, long the troubleshooting outfit on foreign soil. While badly outnumbered, Americans and their allies fight a desperate rearguard action on the Asiatic continent. Marine reinforcements are rushed to the scene from West Coast ports of embarkation. The Leathernecks typify the nation's mood of mobilization since the Red sneak attack on Southern Korea. They leave to join the first officially approved United Nations police force to stem the Korean communists who are driving Americans and Southern Koreans into retreat along a wide front. Facing overwhelming numerical and armored strength of a red-trained army, the Allies retreat southward to regroup and set up a new defense line. GIs dig in along the Kum River in a desperate rearguard action. Artillery rushed in by air goes into action. Against heavily armored columns, the Allies fight desperately to maintain the ever-increasing supply lines coming to the front. But the battle is not always successful. One ammunition train is bombed and completely demolished, a grievous blow to the cause of invaded and ravished Southern Korea. But the United Nations forces begin to tighten their defense, and American tanks begin to make their appearance. Although outgunned and outnumbered, they play a large part in slowing the Red advance. The tragic cost of maintaining the peace. Here are the first Americans who paid with their lives, and some of these were taken prisoner, bound, and shot to death by their captors. Already America has suffered 500 casualties, and 40 have paid with their lives. 5 short years after a global war, Americans again pay in blood the price of peace. Leader among the free nations of the earth, her sons once more make the supreme sacrifice. Under the banner of the United Nations, Americans lead the way in the fight against tyranny and slavery throughout the world.
The UN forces on September 14th, 1950, take a risky gamble that pays off.
United Nations forces make a lightning thrust on the west coast port of Incheon. As the invasion fleet nears land, there is feverish activity in the amphibious force. For them, it is D-Day, -1, and landing operations will soon begin. In one of the most brilliant strategic moves of the Korean conflict, elements of the 77th Task Force set the stage for invasion. An end run behind the North Korean lines. Destroyers open up. Rockets take it from there. With Walmy Island guarding the harbor softened up, Marines swarm into landing craft for the attack. Under cover of a continuous barrage of rocket fire, the whole harbor of Incheon is brought under control. But the real test lies ahead. As the landing craft head for the beach, they face an unknown strength in the Incheon garrison. Once again, the Marines are sticking their leather necks out. With the 7th Infantry Division and South Korean allies, 40,000 men are involved in the operation. The largest single United Nations undertaking since the outbreak of hostilities. Weeks of preparation and practice have gone into the thrust that catches Red Koreans completely by surprise. Incheon is softened up as the Marines hit the beach and they land almost at will on the island of Walmy. From here they must cross the causeway leading into the city of Incheon itself. With the landing successfully accomplished and with the Navy in command of the coast, the next stop is Seoul, Korea's ancient capital. General MacArthur pays a surprise visit to the Incheon front to observe personally the brilliant achievement. The United Nations...
But the Korean War will not provide many other brilliant achievements. In time, General MacArthur will be dismissed by President Truman for insubordination, and America will tire of the seesaw war. Eventually, Americans will turn to General Eisenhower as president to help get us out of the Korean mess.
For GI and cameraman.
The Incheon invasion will only lead to eventual stalemate in spite of the rosy optimism of the newsreels.
This is the road to Seoul and the beginning of victory.
America changes again on the first Tuesday in November 1952.
America speaks at the polling booths from coast to coast as 55 million from all walks of life cast their votes for the 33rd man to become president of the United States. From the farms and urban centers, they pile up the biggest vote in the nation's history. An aroused America cuts across all party and factional lines to record its verdict. Here is the freest democracy in action. The aged and young bring the cross-section of the people to the expression of their will in an atmosphere of calm domestic purpose. Among the prominent voters is elder statesman Herbert Hoover, last Republican president who cast his ballot in New York. President and Mrs. Truman returned to their home in Independence, Missouri, to vote after a whirlwind campaign on behalf of Democratic candidate Adlai Stevenson. In the village of Half Day, Illinois, near his hometown of Bloomington, Governor Stevenson records his vote after one of the most strenuous campaigns in history. Starting as a political unknown, he became a nationally known figure. In New York, General Eisenhower signs the register early on the morning of Election Day. After an illustrious military career and a fighting political campaign, he stands before the American electorate awaiting their answer. While on the opposite side of the country, his running mate, Richard Nixon, and his wife take their turn at the polls in California. Democratic headquarters in Washington, scene of gloom and defeat, as the sweep to Ike becomes more and more apparent. Men who had worked hard for Governor Stevenson now wait, their spirits numbed, for the soon-expected concession of defeat from Springfield, Illinois. It comes soon. Illinois falls to Ike, a sign of the end. It's Eisenhower by a landslide, the greatest plurality of any Republican standard-bearer, with 30 million votes, well over 400 electoral votes. At Republican headquarters, a tremendous ovation greets the president-elect and the next First Lady. A beaming Ike and a radiant Mamie. The long campaign is over. The American people have spoken with a resounding voice at the polls. Victory is here. After 20 years, the Republican Party is back in power. General Dwight D. Eisenhower is elected. His party has won control of Congress with the Senate pretty evenly divided.
America enters the space age, January 31st, 1958.
At Cape Canaveral, Florida, the Army's Jupiter C rocket is ready for America's second attempt to launch a space satellite. No relation to the IRBM Jupiter, this is a rebuilt Redstone, a 200-mile missile carrying, instead of a warhead, 3 stages of solid fuel booster rockets and the Explorer, a 6-foot bullet only inches across, crammed with electronic gear. 30 pounds of payload. This close-up of the United States edition of Sputnik was made at a press conference with leaders of the scientific teams, Dr. Wernher von Braun, Dr. James Van Allen, and Dr. William Pickering, a 3-way collaboration between private industry, academic science, and the military. Jupiter C stands poised on its launching pad. The hours-long countdown approaches 0, a moment of enormous tension, for every missile launching is still an experiment. Any one of tens of thousands of things can go wrong, with catastrophic results. But all that can be done to assure perfection has been done. The moment is at hand. The countdown reaches 0.
But it will take the administration of the next president, the first born in the 20th century, to get us to the moon. Meanwhile, America is content with its first successful satellite launching.
Some 3 minutes later, Explorer is in orbit, broadcasting to the world its coded scientific data. Cosmic ray intensity, meteor impact, solar radiation. These are the dry facts that will help carry man ever farther into the age of space.
The presidential election of November 3rd, 1960 removes from American politics the myth that a Catholic cannot be elected president. It is a day that changed the course of American political history.
Citizens from Maine to Hawaii record their choices as the attention of the entire globe focuses on the contest for the leadership of the most powerful nation of the free world. The Democratic nominee is an early favorite, and first returns bear out predictions in Mr. Kennedy's favor. But GOP standard-bearer Richard Nixon is staunchly supported, not least by President Eisenhower, who was up early, arriving at 6:18 a.m. at Cumberland Township, Pennsylvania, near his Gettysburg farm, to cast his ballot. Eager crowds gathered outside the West End branch of the Boston Public Library as Senator Kennedy and his pretty wife arrived at the polling place early on Election Day before flying on to Cape Cod to await the outcome. Vice President Nixon and his wife, Pat, vote in the playroom of a private home in Whittier, California, the Los Angeles suburb where Mr. Nixon grew up. Mr. Nixon's running mate on the GOP ticket, Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge, was almost totally overshadowed on Election Day by the popular concentration on the principals in one of the most strenuously contested election battles in the nation's history. Senator Lyndon Johnson, Mr. Kennedy's running mate, shared his counterpart's plight this Election Day, as the vagaries of the popular ballot resulted in one of the closest national elections since 1916. Through the long hours of the night, as local districts tallied their results, the Kennedy column recorded an electoral vote frustratingly short of the 269 necessary to win. At his Hyannisport, Massachusetts residence, the Democratic candidate and his wife stoically waited out the returns, as did Vice President Nixon on the other side of the country, who even made a quick trip across the border for an Election Day lunch. That night, Mr. Nixon appeared at local GOP headquarters with his wife to the cheers of campaign workers. At almost 4 a.m., he virtually acknowledged defeat.
As I look at the board here, while there are still some results still to come in, if the present trend continues, if Mr. Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, will be the next president of the United States.
The hours that followed were frustrating and baffling as the key returns hung in the balance. Not till the middle of the next day was the victory clinched by one of the closest margins recorded, a plurality of barely over 300,000. The unexpectedly delayed climax saw Senator Kennedy the victor with a clear margin of electoral votes. At 43 years of age, he is the youngest man ever voted into the White House and the first Catholic chief executive in the history of the nation, with victories in the Southern Bible Belt, as well as the industrial centers of the North, to attest the shattering of a long-standing political taboo. In Mr. Kennedy's first public appearance after his election, accompanied by his wife Jacqueline, his father, Financier Joseph Kennedy, makes his first appearance since the campaign began, and the weary president-elect makes his first address in his new capacity.
To all Americans, I say that the next 4 years are going to be difficult and challenging years for us all. The election may have been a close one, but I think that there is general agreement by all of our citizens that a supreme national effort will be needed in the years ahead to move this country safely through the 1960s. I ask your help in this effort, and I can assure you that every degree of mind and spirit that I possess will be devoted to the long-range interests of the United States and to the cause of freedom around the world. So now my wife and I prepare for a new administration and for a new baby. Thank you.
The day, February 7th, 1962, an American orbits the Earth.
5 hours before he is destined to take a giant stride into history, Colonel John H. Glenn, Jr. squeezes into his spacesuit. His smiling face belies the 10 postponements of his flight that have kept him grounded. This morning, the weather over Cape Canaveral and in the pickup areas is better, and there's an air of optimism as the colonel walks to the gantry elevator. Carrying his now familiar portable air conditioner, Glenn prepares to go to the 11th deck as clocks point to 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The skies are beginning to lighten, and a cool north wind rustles across the Cape. The colonel's date with destiny comes 10 months after the Russians claimed an orbital flight by Yuri Gagarin, and less than a year after Alan Shepard blazed a suborbital trail for the U.S. This is the climax of 3 years of training. This is the moment when the eyes of the world turn to Cape Canaveral. The Russian orbits were in a thick fog of secrecy. The United States stands or falls in the white-hot glare of worldwide publicity. In the capsule atop the Atlas missile, the colonel will be strapped to a contoured couch. Once in flight, the Mercury will be tilted so that the astronaut will ride backwards. The seconds tick off as his rendezvous with space approaches. The hatch cover causes a slight delay when a defective bolt is discovered. Then, millions are moved to silent prayer. Everything is go. The takeoff of the Atlas, blasted aloft by 360,000 pounds of thrust, carries the Mercury gracefully skyward. The Friendship 7, climbing rapidly out of the Earth's atmosphere, exerts a pressure of 6 times the force of gravity on the astronaut. Loud and clear, he reports back to Mercury Control, reading off his instruments, commenting on his reactions, all as coolly and calmly as if he was commuting on the 827. Glenn is able to control the yaw and pitch of the vehicle himself. Now comes the moment when the Mercury is turned so that Glenn will be seated facing backwards. He checks with ground control.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous. Roger, turnaround has started. Capsule turning around, and I could see the booster during turnaround just a couple of 100 yards behind me. It was beautiful. Roger, 7. You have a go, at least 7 orbits. Roger, understand go for at least 7 orbits.
Actual pictures of Glenn in the capsule will give scientists the opportunity to study his reactions as he passes over the Canary Islands, Africa, the Indian Ocean, Australia, back across the Pacific and over the United States. He speeds at 17,500 miles an hour, reaching a high point of 160 miles and a low altitude of 99 miles. Each of the 3 orbits takes about 90 minutes. 3 times the colonel sees the sun rise within a period of 4 hours and 56 minutes. 3 times around the globe for a trip of 81,000 miles before he re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, a shield protecting the astronaut from the intense heat. The carrier Randolph is the command ship in the pickup area, but Glenn, instructed not to jettison his retrol rockets, lands short of the carrier. Ground instruments indicated his heat shield was loose, and he was instructed to hold onto his rocket bank to help hold the shield in place. Right at hand, however, is the destroyer Noah, and she speeds to the capsule to take the vehicle and pilot aboard. Despite a few shaky moments among ground control personnel, Glenn is down, hale and hearty. With support cables attached, a pincer-like crane will lift the Friendship 7 aboard.
Later this year, a more significant frontier will be crossed. Meanwhile, a newsreel reflects a nation's pride.
The end of a saga. The now famous Friendship 7 is safely lashed to the deck of the destroyer, and the crew prepares to help Glenn from the capsule. First, they attempt to help the colonel from his complex prison through the upper exit in the mouth. They encounter difficulties, and so it is decided to blow off the escape hatch cover. First glimpse of the conquering hero, Colonel John H. Glenn. He left his footprints among the stars. He has a grin as wide as the path he blazed.
The day we didn't have a nuclear war.
They retreat to Moscow. Russian ships steam out from Cuban ports with their decks loaded with missiles the Soviets are withdrawing under pressure from the New World. It's one of the last chapters in the offensive threat from Cuba that led the United States to throw a quarantine around that island and force the Russians to dismantle their medium-range rocket installations. U.S. planes and picket ships have counted 42 rockets on Russian-bound ships. But still unresolved is the question of the jet bombers in Cuba. Castro claims they belong to him and that he will not give them up. The U.S. insists the Russians must remove them before the quarantine will be lifted.
Integration of American schools takes a major step on June 11, 1963.
The University of Alabama campus at Tuscaloosa is under a tight security guard of state police as Governor George Wallace appeals for calm and prepares to confront a deputy U.S. attorney. The federal officers are armed with a proclamation from President Kennedy urging the governor to end his efforts to prevent 2 Negro students from registering at the university. The governor is adamant. He made a campaign promise to stand in the doorway himself to prevent the integration of the last all-white state university. After the federal officers leave, there's a lull of several hours while President Kennedy federalizes the Alabama National Guard and...
In 3 days, another major civil rights event will take place. Meanwhile, Alabama yields.
Brigadier General Henry Graham arrives to tell the governor, "It's my sad duty to ask you to step aside on orders of the President of the United States." The governor yields to federal authority, but promises to continue what he terms a constitutional fight. There was no untoward incident at any time during this confrontation of state and federal authority. Five minutes after the governor leaves, James Hood is the first of his race to become a University of Alabama student.
On June 14, 1963, the civil rights movement picks up momentum in our nation's capital.
Just 100 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves, 200,000 people converge on the nation's capital to rally for civil rights. They come by train, they come by bus and by air. They come from the north, the south, the east and west. They come united in one cause, to urge Congress to pass a civil rights bill to end forever the blight of racial inequity. This great throng with a cause gathers on the mall that stretches from the Washington Monument toward the Capitol. The theme, the keynote, the thought uppermost in minds of all here today is best set forth by Dr. King. He sums up a day the Capitol will long remember.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
Washington, D.C., 1963. Democracy speaks in a mighty voice.
November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy is assassinated.
A dark page in the annals of America has been written to the crack of an assassin's bullet. A nation mourns, the world grieves. The man who became 35th president less than 3 years ago is dead. He led his country boldly through the treacherous shoals of Cold War crises. His firm commitments to support the cause of democracy throughout the world won him a claim almost unprecedented in the history of the presidency. He faced up to communist threats with such firm shows of force that Khrushchev backed down in Cuba, softened the hard red line on Berlin. He brought to the White House the vigor of youth and a family that captivated the hearts of all. No possible shadow loomed over this last group picture of his family, John and Jacqueline, John and Caroline. Death has closed the cover in album portraits like this. His rendezvous with grim destiny begins a little after noontime as his plane lands in Dallas. Earlier, he had received a tumultuous reception in Fort Worth, and now more thousands are waiting to greet him in downtown Dallas. But death is less than 1 short hour away. At 1:25, the motorcade moves into the downtown area. Death is 6 minutes away. In a warehouse, a sniper with a rifle poised waits. The cheers of the crowd almost muffle the 3 shots. The assassin's aim is deadly. The area is aswarm with police, rangers, and Secret Service men. The murderer slips the net, but a few blocks away, a man is captured after he is reported to have killed a policeman. That man is a 24-year-old pro-Castro Texan who once sought Soviet citizenship. He is charged with murder. Meanwhile, the president had been rushed to a nearby hospital where life lingered as a waiting world prayed. A half hour later, he was dead, his life crushed like his wife's abandoned bouquet. A shocked nation weeps. Across the country, around the world, disbelief was the first reaction. Then a great outpouring of grief, shock, and revulsion. A proud banner is lowered. The empty White House is a symbol of this infamous mockery of American ideals of peace and freedom. Peoples of all faiths unite in prayer for the first Catholic to become president. The United Nations General Assembly joins in a minute of silent tribute to the man who fought so hard and valiantly for the ideals of this international body. The Iron Curtain was dissolved in the sincerity of their sorrow.
To the newsreels, November 22nd, 1963 is a day of national shock and mourning. But the day will be more significant than that in the long run. With Johnson now president, there will be a shift in national priorities. The Great Society will replace the New Frontier. Johnson's focus will be on civil rights and other social issues, although on this day, he and the rest of the nation must deal with the assassination of a president.
Mr. Johnson accompanies the martyred president's body back to the Capitol, a Capitol still paralyzed by shock. Sad tasks are ahead. It is arranged that the president's body will first lie in repose at the White House. Then it will be moved to the rotunda of the Capitol for public homage. The president's body is met by a cordon of servicemen. They represent all the armed forces in honoring their commander-in-chief. The widow, on the arm of her brother-in-law, remains a towering figure of fortitude through her long ordeal. Steadfast in death as in life, she accompanies her beloved on his lonely ride. Then President Johnson and the First Lady leave the plane. Now the Texan, who has devoted his life to an energetic public career, faces the burdens of office in days of foreign and domestic crises to keep burning the torch that has inspired a free world. With humility, the President of the United States harks to the future.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
In some men, the presidency has bred greatness. They have become giants forged in the crucible of courage. Now begins a new chapter in the history of a nation grown great under the inspired leadership of great men. President Johnson faces his monumental tasks with a sense of integrity that is unquestioned, with knowledge that breeds respect, and with hope that God will guide his hand. Far into his first night as president, he faces his awesome future unflinchingly. The light of reason won't be dimmed by a rifle shot. May God, in his wisdom, help President Johnson keep it shining brightly.
Civil rights guaranteed for all.
Congress passes the most sweeping civil rights bill ever to be written into the law, and thus reaffirms the conception of equality for all men that began with Lincoln and the Civil War 100 years ago. The Negro won his freedom then. He wins his dignity now. 5 hours after the House passes the measure, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is signed at the White House by President Johnson. Before an audience of legislators and civil rights leaders who had labored long and hard for passage of the bill, President Johnson calls for all Americans to back what he calls a turning point in history.
This Civil Rights Act is a challenge to all of us to go to work in our communities and our states, in our homes and in our hearts, to eliminate.
On this day, less than a year since Kennedy's assassination, it is clear that Johnson is following his own sense of what the national purpose should be. Johnson's focus now is racial peace and justice at home. On a day less than a month from now, an action he will take will have far-reaching consequences in Vietnam. But today, his attention is on a significant domestic issue, civil rights.
Integration leader Martin Luther King receives his pen, a gift he said he would cherish. The Department of Justice will enforce the law if necessary, and G-Man Chief J. Edgar Hoover is present. Another group of pens is reserved for the Kennedys, and the Attorney General is entrusted with a half dozen. Now, in this summer of 1964, the Civil Rights Bill is the law of the land. In the words of the President, it restricts no one's freedom so long as he respects the rights of others.
Vietnam Action is approved August 7, 1964.
Swift and sure has been U.S. retaliation for communist PT boat attacks on the high seas. This is the Maddox, one of the two destroyers that were attacked while patrolling international waters in the Gulf of Tonkin near North Vietnam. Warplanes from two carriers, the Ticonderoga and the Constellation, avenged the unwarranted red assault with 64 sorties to North Vietnam PT bases. 25 boats, more than half the fleet, were destroyed, and North Vietnam oil reserves badly depleted. It is estimated 10% went up in flames after direct hits. The Pentagon said 2 pilots were lost. One was reported to be a prisoner of the Reds. The U.S. sorties were launched for one purpose, as a warning to the communists that unprovoked attacks will bring prompt response. The lights burned all night in the White House as President Johnson conferred with his advisors, and he went before the nation to report on the crisis.
In the larger sense, this new act of aggression aimed directly at our own forces
again brings home to all of us in the United States the importance of the struggle for peace and security in Southeast Asia. Aggression by terror against the peaceful villagers of South Vietnam has now been joined by open aggression on the high seas against the United States of America. The determination of all Americans to carry out our full commitment to the people and to the government of South Vietnam will be redoubled by this outrage. Yet our response for the present.
On that fateful day in August 1964, America and Johnson did not want a long, bloody, unresolved war, but that was on the way, this day that changed America.
We still seek no wider war. I have instructed the Secretary of State to make this position totally clear to friends and to adversaries, and indeed to all.
Before this new Southeast Asia crisis, the United States had announced that 5,000 more military advisors were being sent to South Vietnam to bring our forces there to 21,000. Now this number will be increased even further. At sea, on land, and in the air, the awesome United States military machine is mounting a force that can face up to any threat. In the field, the communist Viet Cong rebels appear to be stronger in recent weeks. They have made hit-and-run raids within 4 miles of Saigon, center of U.S. and South Vietnam operations. There are reports of an enemy troop buildup on the South Vietnam northern border. Now it appears that for the first time, there is talk of a South Vietnam drive into North Vietnam.
There is no going back from any of these 21 days that changed America.
Reinforcements are being moved into strategic locations as part of a new strategy in this frustrating war. This is not to force a showdown with the Reds, but to emphasize the U.S. wish to contain the war. Interceptor and fighter bomber aircraft are being flown into South Vietnam and Thailand rapidly, as other air squadrons are transferred from the United States to advanced bases in the Pacific. As always, political differences faded in the United States, and leaders of both parties united behind the president to grant him all powers necessary to carry out our commitments to defend world peace.
It is a solemn responsibility to have to order even limited military action by forces whose overall strength is as vast and as awesome as those of the United States of America. But it is my considered conviction, shared throughout your government, that firmness in the right is indispensable today for peace.
The voice of the people was heard in the land. 68 million citizens of the United States go to the polls to exercise their cherished franchise, and an overwhelming mandate is handed to Lyndon Baines Johnson, who becomes 36th President of the United States.
Americans are not aware that their overwhelming vote for Johnson on this day, November 3rd, 1964, will allow the Vietnam conflict to escalate and eventually bitterly divide the nation.
It is an historical, sweeping victory, approached only by that of Franklin Roosevelt in 1936. It is an election that crosses party lines, sees 5 states in the solid South defect to the GOP, and has political scientists wondering.
These have been those 21 historic days whose consequences Americans could never fully anticipate. Events the newsreels faithfully recorded for us to look back on later.
In victory, he seems subdued by the terrible burdens he must assume during the coming years. The United States is a nation that can be divided in the heat of an election and united again quickly when differences are resolved. A mandate has been given. Now may the people of the United States move forward behind their president, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
21 days that changed America.